Hi, everybody. Okay, so let's get started. The last two topics that we are going to cover are the cultural and environmental consequences of being so interconnected during this time of trade expansion and growth. So this one's going to be a bit of a beast, and I do apologize, but there is a lot to talk about. So, because there was this expansion and growth of communication and exchange networks, you no longer had areas of the world who were completely separated from one another. So this era really saw this deepening and widening of old and new networks of human interaction within and across various regions in the world. And as a result, there were these unprecedented concentrations of wealth and this growth of cross cultural exchanges. So we see, Muslim, innovations in Europe, and Europe using a lot of this stuff to start their, age of exploration. So we see innovations in transportation and state policies and mercantile practices that help expand and grow commercial networks. So let's dig into some of these historical developments. So we're looking at the diffusion of cultural beliefs, so the spread and influence of religion, of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam throughout Afro-Eurasia. And then we're going to talk about specific scientific and technological innovations. One that will be very important throughout the ages is gunpowder. During this time, the fate of cities also rapidly different depending on where you were, because you had these periods of significant increase and then significant decrease in urbanization. So you constantly saw this with cities, particularly in Asia with the Mongols, because if you lived in a big city, yeah. And then we'll talk about the explorers or the travelers that um, wrote down their experiences. And there are actually three from this time period. One we always talk about, Marco Polo, but the other two are often left out. One in particular that is way more awesome than Marco Polo is Ibn Battuta, and we'll talk more about him in just a second. So let's start off by talking about the spread and influence of Buddhism. So this map actually serves to show you how much Buddhism has spread. So this is the percent of the population in each of these countries, like in the last 10 years, right? So if this map shows you anything, it shows you how much trade influences the spread of certain cultural practices, or like religion. So there are two types of Buddhism. There's the Mahayana, which we have talked about, and then there's the Theravada. Theravada is like a more conservative, traditional form of Buddhism, whereas the Mahayana was adapted to fit the needs of the people. So the Silk Roads actually became conduits of culture. They had just more than an economic impact. Buddhism, which is from India, widely spread throughout Central and East Asia thanks to merchants on the Silk Road. And Buddhism appealed to these merchants because it was a more universal message versus the Brahmin dominated Hinduism that had a very strict caste system. So one of the reasons why it didn't spread into the West is because there was kind of like this barrier with the Persians. They stuck wholeheartedly to the Zoroastrianism. So it didn't really spread that way. But one of the things that it did with Zoroastrianism is that it started to adapt as it spread. So originally it wasn't focused on material wealth, but then the addition of the wealthy merchants meant that some priorities did have to shift. So this is where we get the Mahayana Buddhism. It flourished along the Silk Roads because it became very popular because it emphasized compassion. And it also used kind of like these spiritual leaders, the Bodhisattvas, they were people who could achieve enlightenment, but they decided to hold themselves back so that they could guide other people to nirvana. And then, of course, Buddha was seen as the divine. So Buddhism stopped, as I said, because of the Seleucid Empire. They were the ones who still practiced Zoroastrianism, and it was pretty hardcore belief in the Persian Empire. While they were at one point very friendly um, to other religions, they were still for the most part Zoroastrian. Now, one of the reasons why you had cities pop up where they did is because merchants who were Buddhist and very wealthy could gain religious merit by helping to build monasteries and support monks. So these monasteries provided a twofold benefit to these merchants. So not only were they gaining religious merit, but they also provided themselves with a convenient and culturally familiar place to rest and resupply. So many of these monasteries, were built in the middle of nowhere, but they became cities and cosmopolitan centers of learning and commerce. So you saw this growth around monasteries. And then also a part of the adaptation or the change of Buddhism, you actually saw the increased use of Zoroastrian fire rituals in Buddhist practices. So it's very interesting. So this chart is just the difference between the Theravada and the Mahayana, traditions within Buddhism. And it's very interesting because one side is like reaching nirvana is the ultimate goal, but on the other side, it's like a vow to be reborn in order to help all of human beings. Theravada does wisdom first, whereas Mahayana was compassion is the highest value. So you see these very different takes on Buddhism and how it's practiced. So in China, we know what happened with the spread of Buddhism because of the Longman Caves, or one of the reasons is because it illustrates the spread of Buddhism in China. So in China in particular, you had Taoism and Confucianism, you had all of these different beliefs. Systems or philosophies. Well, once Buddhism came into play, you started to hear the term Chinese popular religion. And this was a synchronous blend of Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Because it wasn't like a cookie cutter, like one size fits all. So as you start to see with religion is it starts to be adapted to fit the areas, specifically with Buddhism, because they kept their traditions but blended it with this new belief system. So in particular, Chinese popular culture was the synthesis of faiths that emphasized the immortals, the festivals, and other religious observances that the Chinese people had always been used to. In Japan, we've talked about this. Go back and revisit the videos, but it was basically adapted to fit the Chinese or the Japanese people. They brought in Buddhism, which was already adapted in China the second time around, right? Not when the prince forced everybody to become Buddhist. But when it came back, you saw here are the Buddhist practices of Mahayana, and then we are going to continue, our ancestral honoring and worship while also being Buddhist. So this is the blend of Japanese with Buddhism. And watch the videos. It's very interesting. Now, what does this look like in Southeast Asia? Well, we've seen this photo before. It's the Borobudur. This is the famous structure that is in Java. It's, a mountain-like structure that has 10 levels, 3 miles of walkway and very elaborate carvings. So it's one of the most famous temples of Buddhism or Hinduism. And this displays syncretism at its finest, because the carvings and statues in this temple all depict Javanese features, so scenes that are set in Java and not India, where we know Buddhism and Hinduism came from. So this actually resonated with a lot of the mountain worship in Southeast Asia, because it was like homes of ancestral spirits. So it's kind of interesting to see how Buddhism and religion is adapted to specific areas. So in Korea, Buddhism spread because of Chinese conquest in civilization or colonization, and the tribute system was used with Korea to China because it ensured this cultural link. So Korean Buddhists would actually go to China to learn and to grow in their understanding. And Buddhism actually in Korea left a longer lasting impact on their culture versus Chinese Confucianism. Now, in Vietnam, this is where Buddhism gets really interesting for me, is because they adopted in Vietnam Buddhism because of China. There was direct rule by Chinese officials. But in Vietnam, it's a less patriarchal society than China was. So they actually believe in a female Buddha in their popular religion. And this is syncretism at its finest in Vietnam, blending their less patriarchal society with Chinese Buddhist culture. Now, all over Asia, you will see various Hindu temples, you'll see various Buddha temples, various Buddha statues. Like, it just spread all over the place. So the spread of Hinduism is very similar with the spread of Buddhism. So it started in India. So how did one of the largest religious construction projects end up in Cambodia? So Angkor Wat, it literally means city temple, and it was built to be a temple for Vishnu. So it was dedicated to the Hindu god of Vishnu. And Vishnu is one of the three main gods of Hinduism. Shiva and Brahma are the others. Now, the king who built this, his name translates to protector of the sun, whereas Vishnu is seen as the protector. So it's believed that Angkor Wat was not only dedicated to Vishnu as a temple dedicated to Vishnu, but also that it was supposed to serve as the king's mausoleum when he died. There's all this speculation around it because we don't actually know. There isn't any, text or inscriptions that mention the temple by name. There's not a whole lot of information there other than this giant structure that I know that I have seen in movies, but never really understood what it was. I thought it was very similar to the Taj Mahal in India. It was either a grand palace or it was a grand resting place. But it is a temple to the Hindu god Vishnu. And it is huge. So this video is just simulating 24 hours. Go finish it. It's actually pretty incredible to see what they have come up with. So the spread and influence of Islam. It's very similar to Buddhism and Hinduism into Central and East Asia and Southeast Asia. We know that Islam spread because of the trade routes. So these are the trade routes that you're looking at, the Silk Roads, the Trans-Sahara, and then also the Indian Ocean basin. So it shows that through trade, Islam greatly spread and had a massive influence on the culture of these areas. So the world of Islamic civilization was an immense arena for exchange. There were all sorts of goods and technologies that were widely circulated. So because of its location in Central Afro-Eurasia, they were able to break down political barriers between the Byzantine and the Persian empires. And they put a value on commerce because Muhammad himself, the prophet of Islam, was a trader. He was a merchant. So merchant Muslims became very prominent and dominant players in all of the major Afro-Eurasian trade routes, including the Mediterranean Sea, along the revived Silk Roads, across the Sahara, the Indian Ocean basin. There's even a colony at Canton in southern China that links Islam to Asia. And so this is a mosque in a town in China. You even have a Chinese explorer, Zhang Hao, who was a Muslim himself. So you start to see the Islamic civilization contribute to ecological change and agricultural products and practices, which spread from region to region. So you saw rice, moving from Southeast Asia into Africa, sugarcane and sorghum. You had spinach and artichokes, you had bananas, and then you also had cotton. This all spread from South and Southeast Asia into the Middle East and into Africa. So this was called the Islamic Green Revolution because they saw an increase in food production. When you see an increase in food production, you see the population grow, you see urbanization, and you also start to see industrial growth as well. And then the religious influence of it started to affect change, specifically in Africa. So Northern Africa is predominantly Muslim, whereas Southern Africa is predominantly Christian. But you see through trade in the Indian Ocean basin that you have the Swahili city-states that create diasporic Muslim communities. So you see Islam into the southern region of Africa. You also see in the Swahili city-states, their language is greatly influenced. They use Arabic script and some Arabic loanwords, but grammatically, the Swahili language has Bantu roots. And you see that many of the ruling families actually claimed that they were Arabic or Persian because these merchants would settle along the coast and start blending into the families. So this also increased the growth of Islam into Africa. And we've seen these pictures before when we went over Africa. So what happens with these scientific and technological innovations? Well, we know first and foremost that the first movable type, so a printer, came from China, along with gunpowder, the compass, and paper. Now, Dar al-Islam and China walked so Europe could run. That is because everything that you've learned about the Enlightenment and Renaissance actually came from inspirations or came from China. So in China, in the Middle East, they preserved the Greco-Roman philosophy and literature, which led to the Renaissance and it led to humanism and the Enlightenment. You had medical advances in the Middle East. You saw advances in astronomy, which led to the discovery of the New World. It led to the scientific revolution. You also had advancements in mathematics, which led to the scientific revolution. Gunpowder led to guns in Europe. You had the magnetic compass, which also made it easier to discover the New World. You had the movable type and paper, which allowed Johann Gutenberg to simplify the printing process and start mass printing texts. So here, movable type to the printing press, and this allowed for people to start learning again. Now we will watch this video in class together because it is quite fascinating. So lastly, you have the Afro-Eurasian travelers. Ibn Battuta is probably one of my favorite travelers throughout all of history. He is Muslim and he is Moroccan. And he actually set out on a Hajj to Mecca. It took him 16 months, but he didn't return to Morocco for 24 years. He visited everywhere, Northern Africa, the Horn of Africa, West Africa. He visited parts of Europe and all over Asia and China, but we don't talk about him like we do Marco Polo, and it is a great disservice. So everything in red, all of these routes in red, this is where Ibn Battuta went. You see in blue behind it, that's Marco Polo's journey. And then you see Zheng He in orange. But we failed to talk about this man. It's incredible. Um, Now, when Batuta came back to Morocco, he actually told his story to a scholar who recorded everything in the Rihal, or the Rila, and it means journey. Historians often question the accuracy of Batuta's Rila because there are some questionable things in it, some, elaborations, or, it just doesn't make sense. But historians still to this day use it as a resource. They also question Marco Polo's travels. He was a Venetian merchant who traveled like a fraction of what Batuta did. And some even believe that he fabricated his journeys and that he never went to China. There was also speculation that he didn't really spend time with Kublai Khan because why would Kublai Khan open his doors to Marco Polo? But Marco Polo would inspire Christopher Columbus to set sail on the ocean blue. So this is just another map showing you Ibn Batutta's travels alongside Marco Polo's travels, and they are nothing.